The war for freedom rages on. Russia's despicable invasion of Ukraine has become the largest land war in Europe since the ravages of World War II destroyed the continent 77 years ago. The world has united in support of Ukraine, pouring in weapons and other materiel and imposing unprecedented economic punishment for the Russian banking system, oligarchs, and has begun to isolate the country. More needs to be done. Fears of nuclear conflict between NATO and Russia have driven the West's decision not to engage directly with Russian forces. The theory is a no-fly zone would thrust NATO aircraft and military defense systems into directly destroying Russian military assets, an escalation which could lead to the hot war spilling out over the European continent like 77 years ago, World War III. Today, we speak with Igor Novikov, a former advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Igor and his wife have courageously made the decision to stay in Kyiv with their two daughters. They've decided to take a stand, to stay in their home. He has called this war the first social media war and also the first three-dimensional war, being fought on three interacting fronts: economically, militarily, and through information technology. Igor says there will be lessons learned from this war, and that his intention is to consolidate and help spur the changes needed. A defiant Ukraine against Russian aggression has united the world in knowing now that democracy and freedom cannot be allowed to slumber, or it will be gone. Igor, welcome to the show. So happy you could join us. The first thing that comes to mind is, how are you? How's your family? You've courageously decided to stay in Kyiv with your wife and your two daughters, right? Yeah. I believe one daughter's name is Masha.
Yeah, Maria. And the older one is Sophia.
So how are things going?
Well, I mean, relatively speaking, fine. I mean, look, I have to explain one small nuance about this situation. I mean, the situation where I am is relatively okay, if you compare it to places like Mariupol or Kharkiv or even like northwest of Kiev at the moment. Having said that, we still have missiles fly overhead. We hear artillery literally, 24 hours a day. And, in the beginning, it was slightly more nerve-wracking because, there was a Russian advance towards us. So, and being here on the ground and kind of hearing the rumors, hearing the stories, we know what Russians are like. So, first of all, they loot. And they loot a lot. So basically, one way to describe this situation is nothing more than just, very sophisticated armed robbery, with missiles, tanks, and whatever other hardware they have. So it was incredibly worrying because, we live in this posh neighborhood. So kind of we realized that if Russian army ever comes in, I mean, for us, the best case scenario will be if we just get kicked out of a house. But that would literally be a dream come true because, people in our position are usually either executed on the spot or, there's some damage done to them. So yeah, it was weird and it was scary in the beginning. But when we kind of, because it all happened so suddenly. So, one night you're sleeping, the next morning you wake up within the Call of Duty, within the game. So it took some time to to understand the dynamics of this war and the dynamics of their advance. When we realized that, first of all, a possibility, of a Russian soldier appearing on my doorstep suddenly and without warning is pretty much impossible. That won't happen. So we'll have some advanced warning. We can kind of calculate their moves. That gave us some peace of mind. So having kind of understood that, we decided whatever we do, we should keep things as normal as we can. Because, there are many fights going on. And I'll tell you what I'm doing for the country and what my wife is doing and so on and so forth. But, another thing we can do for our society and for the people is to kind of try and stay as positive and as normal as possible.
Carry on.
And to be honest, that's the hardest fight. I mean, having lived through nearly a month of this war, that's the hardest kind of battlefront, because look, it's emotionally draining, it's psychologically draining, and it's like living in in constant stress because of it. You kind of you have this 24/7 feeling of burnout, and it's tough. And one thing, you need that end game, you need that end point to keep sane. And we've agreed that whenever it's over, we're gonna go, not even on holiday, on a rehab trip. So we're planning on going to Paris, probably then fly and see my family in Florida, because I have my distant relatives in Florida.
Where in
Florida? A place called, if I'm not mistaken, Plantation, Florida.
Okay.
So apparently it's not far away from Miami. But I've never been to Florida. I mean, I kind of, my city in the US is Las Vegas. I not for the gambling. I mean, not for the strip clubs. I love the atmosphere. I feed off people's energy, and you get that energy at its most raw form in places where there's a lot of risk. So I love Pattaya in Thailand. I love Las Vegas. I love what else? Oh crap! I mean, I've forgotten names of places. I'm so far fixated and focused.
Hollywood.
No, Hollywood's not like that. I mean, I love LA, but it's nothing like that. It's only a few places in the world where where there's lots of risk, lots of people falling in love, committing suicide, whatever. When people are at their most true. And Vegas is one of those places, and I love it. I love that place for it. I just I go there, and the buffets, obviously. So I eat some good food, and I can just sit and people watch. I love doing that. So
I was really moved when you relayed in another one of your interviews, when you spoke about approaching your wife about the decision about what to do as the war was falling on your heads. And to paraphrase, I think you said that we will leave to be safe, and your wife had some pretty inspirational things to say about being present and about standing up when the moment requires you to stand up, when the crosshairs of history, pardon the allusion, lands on your face. What are you going to do? Could you unpack that a little bit, because it's quite inspirational, Igor. So
well, first of all, I mean, all credit goes to my wife. Look, I'm a firm believer. I don't want to offend anyone. I mean, because I know there's so much changing, and so much conversation centering around gender equality and political correctness and that whole thing. I'm a firm believer in one simple truth: behind any great man, there's a great woman, and that man is nothing without that woman. And if anything, I'm probably a living proof of that. But I'm not saying that I'm great, but I'm saying that the woman behind me has pulled me through so many difficult situations, and got me into so many difficult situations where I had no choice but to to persevere despite the odds. I never doubt that. So the way it happened, I was an advisor to President Zelenskyy for quite some time, and I was in charge of the U.S. policy, so that bilateral relationship with the U.S. And because of that, obviously have friends on both sides of the Atlantic, and some of them are from the intelligence community. And I think it was late October or early November 2021. I got this call from a friend with sources, reliable sources, and the friend told me look, remember you asked me a while back to to have you six, to tell you when something is something might threaten you and your security and the security of your family. Well, this is that phone call. If there's any way that you can get your family out of Ukraine for the winter, at least, you might want to do it because, the likelihood of the Russian invasion currently stands at 70 to 75%. So when that happened, obviously, I never doubted, that person, and especially the sources that person has.
Sure.
So I sat my wife down and said, like, look, Russia's likely to attack. We don't know what form that's going to take, because, what's happening now is the worst case scenario, but even now it sounds unbelievable. So back then it was like, it could be Donbass, could be, that land bridge to Crimea, or so on, and Mariupol and other places.
Yeah, but Crimea Part 2.
Yeah, Crimea Part 2. So, but still, you don't want to be in a country that's fighting, an active war with, a bunch of lunatics. So she listened to me and she said, like, look, I mean, do you actually believe in what you're saying? And even I kind of found it really, unbelievable. So, that denial kind of kicks in to keep you sane. So we had that conversation, the second time when, the situation got worse and more information kind of surfaced. Still, we decided, like, look, we're going to sit and wait, because you have to understand, I mean, this is our home. So everything kind of centers around Kiev in our life. I mean, all our assets are here. So our house, our flat in central Kiev, our cars, our pets, our children, their schooling and whatnot, my business. So like everything I do and everything I am is here. So for us to take off, even like temporarily, it's a major decision. So we had that conversation, if I remember correctly, the third time, like literally a few weeks before it started, roughly around the time, like before President Biden said, like, I believe it's going to happen on the 16th. I think a week before that. And I was pushing hard. So I said, like, look, I mean, I have no problem in staying. So, because, there are two reasons for that. First of all, I mean, I'm Ukrainian and we're just like that. I study Ukrainian history. We're a bunch of mercenaries that appeared as a nation on the crossroads of three major empires.
Right. So between Asia and the West, right?
Three major empires, like the Russian Empire, the Turkish Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Poland thrown into a mix. So like it's a rough part of town. So and if you look historically, we always had those like enclaves. One called Zaporizhzhia Sich near Zaporizhzhia. It's basically like small island fortress where our soldiers lived with their families, so they would party hard, and life would be amazing and very chaotic, and basically representative anarchy. That's how I would describe Ukraine's typical peacetime political system, and it was like that back then. But then when the war came, everyone mobilized, everyone was orderly and kind of unified, and so on and so forth. So historically we like that. So first part of the reason to stay for me personally was like, okay, it's in our blood. I mean, somebody comes to our house, we don't show them our backs, we show them our face. But the second kind of part, look, I'm not sure I have to say, I should say this, but look, every boy who's ever played Counter-Strike, that weird subliminal kind of part of him kind of lives there to experience it in real life, even though it's horrible and it takes 2 minutes of the war to make you realize no, Counter-Strike's way better. So
this is your time moment.
I was like just being an overgrown teenager, reacting to the situation. But my wife, she had similar kind of ideas, but with different, like more mature reasoning. She said, like, look, where are we gonna go to? Poland or Western Ukraine or somewhere in Europe. By the looks of it, I mean, it's not going to end in Ukraine. Until Putin is removed, until there's regime change in Russia, this cancer is going to spread. And God forbid it goes global, because Kim is watching in North Korea and deciding what he should do. China's undecided and it's got some aspirations and territorial interests in Taiwan and whatnot. So it can easily kind of spread. So do we really want to be the people who run away from danger only to kind of to welcome it into their home again, like in due course? And it struck a nerve with me. Not a nerve. It struck a chord with me sorry, I'm dyslexic as well. So struck a chord with me because I was born in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, and Donetsk was the first city to fall under forceful Russian occupation. Because even if we consider Crimea, that referendum, whatever, an annexation, and it was a more or less peaceful annexation. They killed like 5 or 10 people. By Russian standards, it's nothing. Donetsk was the first violent one. I kind of have relatives there, and my kind of grandfather and grandma are buried in a cemetery next to Donetsk airport. So I've no idea what happened to their graves, and so I've been through this once, despite not living in Donetsk. So kind of now is my second time. And she basically said, look, if you're going to run now, you're going to see a third time in Warsaw or in Paris or wherever you move. It's like that curse of fearing your enemy. So, if you keep running, the monsters are going to chase you.
Right.
And what's the best place to kind of face your fears if not your home? Let's turn it into a fortress. Let's have a plan B. Let's have a plan C. Let's not let it affect our kids, but let's not run away. I can't say that I'm a wuss and she was talking me into staying, but she was convincing enough for me to disregard kind of things that were kind of in the back of my mind with regard to children's safety, and because every father, every husband is overprotective and really pedantic about security. So when my younger daughter, when Masha starts running on the street, I kind of run after her and go just don't fall down, be careful, don't run, walk, just walk, don't run. Right. And kids are supposed to run. That's how they learn. So my wife helped me kind of get away from that overprotective mode, and it was a simple decision after that. And yeah, she's tough. I mean, funny story. I was doing an interview for a Swedish newspaper, and they asked me about my wife, and my wife is from Poltava, and Swedes got defeated at Poltava back in the day. So I go my wife is from Poltava. She's a tough woman. That city name might sound familiar to you.
Right. So, I think it's important to note, I mean, Ukraine, you guys have been dealing with this kind of, not a cold war, it's definitely a hot war, because hasn't there been 14,000 deaths in the last 8 years with the war that's been going on in eastern Ukraine?
That we know of. I mean, look, the conflict was bloody enough, but it was a different kind of conflict. So it was basically the way it was developing, there was hot war for about a year, and we had 2 peace agreements, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. So some of the casualties, the first, I don't remember the exact numbers, I think a couple of thousand happened then, but literally it was a positional warfare with a neutral zone in between. Right. And positional
warfare, right.
Yeah, but that positional warfare was constantly being used by Russia to affect domestic politics in Ukraine. So whenever Russia wanted something to happen, they would kind of escalate in Donbass, and that would of course lead to more people dying. I think the number stands at 14 or 15,000 officially, but there is no simple way to actually verify it. So because Russians use really cowardly tactics. I mean, what they do sometimes, and we're seeing it now on the ground again, they would basically shoot from both sides. So there's a city of Donetsk. They would use their artillery to shoot at civilians in rebel-controlled Donetsk, blame it on Ukrainians, and then shoot back at Ukrainians.
Right.
There's Russia doing, shooting from both sides. And Putin's been like that. I mean, what blows my mind, people keep saying oh, we just realized Putin is a mass murderer. He's always been like that. I mean, people of Syria, Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine would vouch for that. I mean, the guy came to power by blowing up residential buildings in his own capital.
Right.
I mean, the guy.
His political career is built on the deaths of thousands of Russians.
Yeah. And he uses terror to kind of, as his attention economy / information warfare weapon. Mm-hmm. So I have my doubts, for example, and I'm going to say something really controversial here, but I have my doubts that, that tragedy in Beslan when a school was taken, remember that the hostage crisis, the children. I have my doubts that, it was simply the terrorists taking over the school. I think Russian intelligence had something to do with it. Mm-hmm. And with the amount of deaths that it resulted and with the tragedy. Why? Because, there's a simple rule, and if you've ever read any Sherlock Holmes or whatever, who benefits? That's the main question. Right. And if you ask that question with regard to Beslan, you kind of it all points to one person. So, and it's incredible that the West now got pushed by that Ukrainian bravery and defiance beyond that red line where they can't pretend anymore. Because that's right. Look, Angela Merkel knew that Putin was a mass murderer. I'm pretty sure every single Western politician with a proper intelligence community in this country knew what was going on. Right. But the thing is, I mean, the West kind of lived in that really disgusting state of blind-sighted capitalism. Right. I mean, I'm all for capitalism, and I fully respect liberal market economies. But there is a limit to where you can earn your money. I mean,
it's kind of when you get to the root of some of the economic philosophy that's wielded in the economy. Externalities, right?
Yeah.
So if you can kick the can down the road on confronting these major issues that threaten prosperity, that's sort of the status quo. That's the de facto setting on your economic machine, if you will.
There's an interesting nuance to this. Look, you have to understand that even if you forego the fact that it's ethically disgusting to to be dealing with bad people and evil people, even if in a free market economy, okay, there is an evil dictator who's killing his own people, but you're doing business with him, and none of what's happening in his country.
So Russia's getting $1 billion a day, right?
That's fine, but there's a small nuance. That kind of equilibrium only works if your counterpart, if your partner, the evil dictator, doesn't have any aspirations towards your assets, your territory, your people, and doesn't have any expansion plans. Mm-hmm. Because if he does, that situation changes. You get out of balance, and you're giving the guy things to weaponize. Because look, Putin cares about money. I mean, we've seen countless yachts, we've seen the palace, and the amount of oligarchs in his inner circle. But there's something else to his motivation. There's another dimension there. Some people say it's to do with his religious beliefs and even occult to a degree. But some people say it's just ideology. He's gone full Hitler for some reason.
Right.
Putler, yeah, exactly. Or he might just be, clinically insane. I mean, those are all possibilities, but none of this changes the fact that the guy wants something more than your money. And that's where it becomes dangerous, because look, for him, selling gas to Europe is not only about, the Russian economy. It's about taking hostage the European energy security to be used as leverage in any of his future moves. So I think, for example, Germany's biggest mistake was to turn away from nuclear, switch back to Russian gas, get fully dependent on it. Because I mean, even now it's ridiculous. There's a mass murderer killing kids. There's the guy who sends helicopters into Ukraine that have "On to Berlin" written on them. Here's the guy who openly says he wants the communist part of Germany, the East Germany, to return. And yet the German politicians and, a lot of the executive government are actually saying, like, look, we realize it's bad, but what can we do? We're dependent on Russian gas. I mean, yeah, fine at the moment, but like, where have you been when this was developing? And if you think about like business, I think one of the most valuable things, at least I'm planning once this is over to focus solely on that, would be lessons learned. How can we adapt? How can we help our, systems, beliefs, theories, rules, methodologies, patterns evolve to be relevant in 2022 and beyond? Because at the moment, like, look, even the economic theory, if you look at it, I mean, it's great. But the thing is, the vast majority of the economic theory used by the academic world and by businesses today was invented before the invention of the internet.
Right.
Now, just look at the size of the e-economy, e-commerce. Look at our reliance on the internet, communications, information, and whatnot, right? Look at the products, look at the supply chains, look at the ripple effects, some major ripple effects that it's caused, like the attention economy and reputational security, digital detox, and all those like spheres that are actually multi-billion new markets growing. Look at the knock-on effects, for example, like of the internet, like the ever-changing macro behavioral patterns in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And like, do you feel safe and comfortable doing business the way you were doing it back in 1985?
Yeah, I mean, the crash of the Industrial Revolution and the information revolution, it's created a ton of disruption and dissonances, and we need to definitely craft a different model.
I'll tell you two interesting things from my keynotes. I mean, I'm quite a famous keynote speaker in Ukraine, and like I enjoy doing it because to me it's like it's a cross between two things I love the most in this life, right? Showbiz and education and the academic world. So if you mix them into this like monster of a child, it's actually quite fun and people enjoy it. But so from my keynotes, first of all, I often refer to Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. And what I do, I sometimes ask my audiences to first to recognize him, because he looks a lot like Lev Tolstoy, the Russian writer. And in Ukraine, people mistake him. And I go like, yeah, guys, I mean, explains everything, right? That's happening in the world if you mistake Tolstoy for Darwin, right? Darwin for Tolstoy. But then I ask them, what that famous quote sounds like, who survives? And everyone keeps saying the strongest. But it's not the strongest to survive and not the most intelligent. It's the most adaptive. Mm-hmm. So if you look at what's going on in the world now, I mean, it's the people, people who run the world are the people who believe it's the strongest who survives. It's people who believe the most intelligent or the richest who survives. But no, it's the most adaptive to change. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And the second thing that I do, and feel free to test it out on your friends and peers. I find these two pictures with 5 differences between them, like kids do. So five differences between these two, like small cartoons. The sock color is different and your t-shirt color is different, so on and so forth. Find 2 pictures with only 5 differences between them and ask anyone to find 6 differences and see what happens after they find 5. Yeah, on the most simple picture you can imagine. Do you think, on the picture where like a 5-year-old would find 5 differences in 30 seconds, do you think an adult would stop and say, no, there are only 5 differences? No, they keep looking for that 6th one. You know why? Because we've been brought up in a world where we were taught by our education system, by our parents, not to question the rules of the game.
Not to question authority.
Not to question authority, not to question our textbooks. I mean, there can't be a typo in the textbook. So if you tell somebody to find 6 differences, they're not going to argue with you and say there are only 5.
Right.
No matter how simple the pictures are. They're going to look for that 6th one until you stop them. And actually, one correlation I noticed: the older the person is, the more adamant that person is to find that 6th difference. So literally, with my mom, I could literally send her to a mental institution if I don't stop her in time.
It's kind of a herd mentality. And just as an aside, so, I wanted to just rewind a little bit. President Zelenskyy has been elevated to world icon status, to that of an unparalleled world leader fighting for democracy, freedom, fighting for Ukraine. How did you come to be an advisor for him and his administration?
Oh, it's a funny story. So, as I already mentioned, I run a Ukrainian chapter of a Silicon Valley think tank called Singularity University.
Beautiful.
So, I because of that, I do a lot of public speaking. So, I've become somewhat of a B-list rock star of the academic world in Ukraine. So, I'm the one who would tell you something interesting academically by using curse words and all the showbiz, bells and whistles. So because of that, people knew who I was, and I got approached by Zelenskyy's inner circle back in the summer of 2018. That was way before he even announced his candidacy. And they asked me, look, we've been to your lectures, and it's fun, it's interesting, it's really enlightening. Would you mind doing a one-day academic program for Zelenskyy and his inner circle, just in case he runs for president? He wants to know, the basics, i.e., of what Singularity kind of teaches, so right. how technology changes the world, business, society, people, and so on and so forth, how to use that exponential technology to make the world a better place, how to solve global challenges, and so on. But we threw something else into a mix. We threw disinformation and anti-disinformation campaigns, the attention economy, behavioral economics, and a lot of interesting bits and pieces. So it was this Frankenstein of an academic program, and they basically asked for for a one-day version of that to be taught to Zelenskyy and some of his inner circle. So. And Zelenskyy was actually on tour, and it was really funny. It took us 3 months to actually meet for the first time, because he was on tour and I was on tour. So whenever we'd agree on the date, he'd call a couple of days before that. His people would call me and say no, he can't do it. He's got a concert in Dnipro, and then can we do it on Friday? No, I'm flying to Odessa to do a public event. So we finally met in November 2018. By the way, I just remembered something funny. Zelenskyy, I think, is probably one of the first politicians in human history who actually made money off his campaign.
Okay.
Yeah, because what he did, instead of spending money to campaign, he went on tour with his comedy troupe to do concerts and kind of campaign at the same time. So he actually made his campaign profitable, which is funny.
Probably the first.
That's thinking out of the box for you. Remember that for your later question.
For sure.
So we met, and I did my usual, and they enjoyed it. He was a really easygoing, kind of down-to-earth guy. We clicked, and literally I added him as a friend on Facebook. A couple of hours later, he added me, and I wrote to him saying thanks for coming. He said, "You're welcome," blah, blah, blah. And then I got reached by his assistant, I think a week later, saying would you like to join the team? And I said, yeah, I would, but I care about what my wife thinks of this situation. So I sat down with her, and she said look, I'll agree to endorse him, and I'll let you endorse him if we sit down with him, and as a social psychologist, and my wife is a social psychologist.
Very good.
Only if I can see that he's genuine, he's sincere. So we met in his office, and my wife, bless her heart, she actually grilled him in a major way. So she literally, if you can imagine, there was I think 10 of us at the table. It was Ivan Bakanov, who's head of national intelligence at the moment, Yuri Kostyuk, his speechwriter, a couple of other people. So I think Razumkov was there, the former speaker of the parliament, and Zelenskyy. So but basically, my wife, in front of all the other people, she kind of focuses her eyes on Zelenskyy and goes, Vova, I want to ask you a few questions. Would you mind answering? And, Zelensky's got his background in showbiz. So, he's used to people kind of trying to confront him. So
Sure.
he usually laughs it off. So he goes like, yeah, Kyle, come.
Yeah, right.
But my wife is really scary when she wants to be. So she just looks him in the eye and goes like, why do you want to be president? Like, and the room goes completely silent.
I love the way you said that. Why do you want to be president?
Yeah, and out of the blue, without like any warning whatsoever. And yeah, he was shocked by the, he's never met it before. So yeah, his answer was actually something that he's lived up to. He said like, look, 100% of Ukrainian people recognize who I am. So unlike most people, unlike you even, I mean, I've got a chance of actually becoming president. It's likely, without depending on like, major financing from big business or oligarchs or, some countries, whatever. So I can just say I want to be president and just become one. I'm as fed up as you with, the way things are going in Ukraine, with corruption, with the fact that this war with Russia, keeps going, and it's been like, 6 years at the time, or 5 years. So like, look, I want to change it. And I've achieved everything else in my life, so I don't see why not. And I've spoken with my family, and my family, they're not ecstatic about it, but they're not like categorically against it. So and he was sincere, and my wife kind of, when we left the office, she said, look, I think he's genuine, so if you want to endorse him, endorse him. I think he might lead somewhere. So I did. I helped them on the campaign trail. There's some funny videos on YouTube if you look for them. We did like, those brainstorm sessions for his vlog on like innovation.
Very cool.
We did a lot of interesting things.
Да.
А вот теперь снимают.
Мы думали, что мы уже сняли. Я еще раз. Ольга Григорьевна, большой вам привет от меня, от ребят. Это узнали этого парня, да. Вы на него похожи, не наоборот. Вот, в общем, все передадут. Будьте здоровы.
And, he won. And basically, I kind of initially, we never agreed. I mean, he never promised anyone any position in the government. So it was off limits. So nobody, before the inauguration, nobody, even his inner circle, didn't know whether they were going to be somebody or, just going to stay friends with them. So it was none of that. Like, if you help me on the campaign trail, I'll make you minister.
Right.
So everyone was being kept in the dark. I kind of suppose and realize that if I make a decision to kind of to go further than the campaign and kind of join his team governing the country, most likely it would be something to do with innovation. I knew for a fact I didn't want to be a part of the executive because I come from an academic background mixed with entrepreneurship. So, right. I can't live in a world where, it takes 3 weeks to achieve something that can be done in 10 minutes.
Right.
It drives me nuts. It makes me aggressive. And, I'm not your typical, executive government material. So, so what I kind of thought I would be doing, I'd be advising him on innovation. So I'd be the smart ass in the back of the room who would, just kind of say like, ooh, I mean, are we going to implement an artificial intelligence to kind of and facial recognition to fight crime, across the country? Or where's a crypto grivnia? Are we going to be the first country with cryptocurrency? And, what are we going to do about, organ transplants? And, what about CRISPR-Cas9 or you name it? By the way, renewable energy was one of the fields that I was supposed to be advising on, and I was advising on partially. Yeah, it's because it's part of the SU curriculum and it's part of, the exponential technological wave.
Absolutely.
And by the way, like a small sidestep here, I think if ever there was a window of opportunity for renewable energy, it is now.
Right.
Why? Because, this war with Russia, regardless of how it ends and how far it spreads, I think it spelled the end of the fossil fuel energy.
Right.
So coal's going away. oil and gas are going to be disrupted in a major way by by the fallout from this war. So there are two ways of going about it. Either kind of endure temporarily discomfort and kind of switch now. So if you Germany, kind of move away from gas and switch back to either nuclear and kind of double down on on those wind farms in Bavaria that you were fighting against like a year ago or something. So either that or pretend like nothing happened and then get disrupted in a major way, like in a year or two. Right. So this is where it's headed. So I kind of thought that would be what I would be doing. And then I think it was, I don't remember whether it was before his inauguration or after, but I went on holiday with my family. And I realized it will be, the last holiday for quite a while. So we went to the Maldives, and my wife was pregnant with Masha. So we knew that she won't be going on holidays for quite some time as well. So I went to this really cool place in the Maldives, because it's probably the only family-oriented 5-star resort there, called Kundima. And when we were there, I got this phone call from one of the Zelenskyy in the circle people saying that, what do you know about Rudy Giuliani? And
I had a question about this later.
Feel free to ask.
Because I know that you had advised Zelenskyy during a real pivotal historical moment in my country.
Let's cut my answer short here and just say what do you know about Rudy Giuliani? And that's when I knew what I was going to be doing.
Right. Very good. So, Igor, you have such a robust background in big picture thinking, messaging, technology, evangelism. We've spoken about the Singularity University, and in a sidebar, you and I were discussing Ray Kurzweil's sort of entry to this whole Singularity mission, which was his pivotal essay, The Law of Accelerating Returns, which is an amazing essay. If an audience hasn't seen it, look it up. It's a great essay talking about how the singularity is basically when technology starts evolving itself at a rate which we cannot perceive anymore because it's exponential.
I would suggest a couple of other people as well. If you have time, go on YouTube, TED, or buy the books, but read up on what people like Amin Tufani from T Labs, Salim Ismail from ExoWorks, I think it's called correctly, and Peter Diamandis, and who else? Everyone's great at Singularity, but those three kind of pay special attention to. And my personal favorite, Pablo Holman,
beautiful,
the ex hacker who's got this unique take on how we need to change our mindset. And I kind of, to paint the picture, I'm probably the most cynical person you'd ever imagine. So I'm very kind of result oriented. So I don't buy anything that sparkles but doesn't have any meaning behind it or foundation. So I'm very skeptical when it comes to coaches and people who tell you to get out of your comfort zone.
Right.
I come from Donetsk. I mean, coal miners are constantly out of their comfort zone. So I think Tony Robbins doesn't have an audience there.
So just as an interjection, so I live in St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri's the show me state.
Yeah.
So show me, show it to me.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and when I first heard of Pablo's before one of our Singularity University global summits in San Francisco, I was very skeptical because look, this hacker telling you how we need to change our mindset. I mean, sounds something very similar to Tony Robbins, and God bless his heart, but I'm not his target audience.
Right.
But no. He's actually got a methodology behind it, and I've been teaching my students based on what he's telling people, because hackers do think differently, and I think everyone in the world needs to become a hacker in terms of the mindset at the moment, because
social hacker.
We need to question authority. We need to question everything, especially, the rules that we got given. We need to question the textbooks that we get given, because, look, if the world is changing quicker than we can print textbooks,
Right.
there is no stability. There's no standing firmly on your 2 feet. You need to ride the bike. I'm stealing that quote from a guy named Astro Teller, who's head of Alphabet X.
Very good. So, you've spoken in the past, Igor, about some of the earth-shattering and disruptive qualities about the Russian-Ukrainian war. Namely, it's the first social media war, as you've expressed. And secondly, you've also stated that this is the first three-dimensional war, meaning a war that's simultaneously being fought economically, militarily, and through information. It strikes me that the confluence of these three poles, if you will, economic, militaristic, and information, has been so unpredictable, even chaotic, that the old school Russian army, plagued by top-down paralysis and yes men populating their war councils, et cetera, I think the Russian army is wholly ill-equipped to just contend with this new environment.
Well, let me quickly interject. The Russian army is a poster child to what nearly every major corporation in the world is. Because, there are two types of business structures. There are companies who reward questions, disagreements, and arguments. Who reward that smart ass at the table who would say no, why are we doing that? Let's do it differently. Or, why... it's a non sequitur that we've been doing our business this way for 20 years. The world is different. Let's do it differently. Right. Instead, if you study big business globally, methodically, you'd find that they're very similar to Putin and his relationship with his army. So, CEO and the board are never questioned by anyone below them. And the governance of those companies is usually very vertically integrated.
Right.
Even if it isn't so in terms of their structure, it is so because of their, paychecks. So, a guy who's earning $2,000 can't really argue with a guy who's got a $200 million annual, golden parachute. Why? Because of psychological defamation of the CEO who's got $200 million, and he somehow thinks that he's bigger and better than the person who earns $2,000. But it's a non sequitur. Both can be right, both can be wrong at any given point in time. And I think Putin fell for his own vertical integration. So he's the dictator. He likes the good news. He doesn't like people who question his decisions, especially when they're erroneous, right? So whenever he makes a mistake, the company that will survive 2022 and beyond would actually reward the person doubting, the general line of the party. But with Putin, no, they kill the messenger. So, and
literally
in that kind of structure, all it takes is just one black swan. And when that black swan arrives, for Putin, it became Ukraine. Look, I keep saying it in my interviews, and I think history books and, the future, declassified materials will prove me right about this. One of the major reasons Putin is losing at the moment is not even the state of his army. It's how he approached this war. They literally rode down Ukrainian roads, in long columns, carrying their parade outfits. They even brought I nearly swore that. They brought an orchestra with them, right? To take. I heard
they had a couple tanks that were dressed in parade paint.
Yeah, there were tanks dressed in parade, color schemes. They had an orchestra, and the reason we know it because we actually, in fighting, we killed a couple of the orchestra members. So the guy literally fell for his own propaganda and for his own denial. So he believed that Ukrainians and Russians are one people. And nobody in his government dared question, his wrong belief, right?
And he believed
the flowers, he believed people welcome him with the flowers. That's why they rode in this way. And when they did, they faced reality. So for him, it was a black swan. Like, look, for big business, to give you a good analogy, it would be like, look, it would be reputational security, for example. I mean, that's one of the things that blows my mind. It's just like, companies do their communications and PR like it's 1985 at the moment. So, they have that inertia. They offer those press releases. They don't have personal brands and ambassadors kind of daily on the news, kind of telling their side of the story, humanizing their business. Instead, they're all like big corporations. And then when a major crisis like this happens, I mean, look, I have some friends at blue chip companies who've left Russia, but they actually called me a week ago saying like, we have a problem. Can you help us? I go, what's the problem? We left Russia. I go, good for you. It's a very grown-up, sensible decision. History will thank you for it. You'll thank yourselves for it. They go like, no, but there's a problem. I go, let me guess. You left too late. So instead of making that announcement in the first 2 days, instead of leading the pack, you had your board meetings. They go like, yes. I go like, and you're experiencing major kind of long tail of that fallout. So that inertia. So you've left, but people still hate you. I go like, yep. What do we do about this? I go like, what? Can't help you now. I'm busy fighting the Russians.
Right.
Once the war is over, you know where to find me. So,
right.
But that's how is that different from how Putin screwed up? It's exactly the same.
I mean, I've been in corporate environments where there's like a micromanaging type of a situation, and frankly, everything just freezes. Everything stops. If there's no ability for middle management to take initiative, and I heard the testimony from some military professionals this morning talking about how the Russian army does not have a professional non-commissioned officer class, that there's none of these staff sergeants and maybe entry-level officers that are able to take initiatives, take the initiative and lead men into war. And it's just this completely broken down system. I mean, the army was coming into Ukraine. They didn't even know what they were doing. Putin is so paranoid about his military and the potential military coup, perhaps, that he kept the plan secret. How can you do that? How can you run a successful operation and nobody knows what they're doing?
Let me tell you a story from the ground here in Kiev. There was this Facebook post yesterday from the guy I know who's who's a member of one of the volunteer divisions. Not the infamous Azov. So, there's no ideology there. They're just Ukrainian and kind of fight. So they're fighting Russians to the northwest of Kiev in a place called Hostoma. It's one of the hottest kind of zones at the moment in Ukraine. And
where is it in the country? Northeast?
It's the northwest of Kiev.
Northwest, okay.
Literally 20 kilometers away from where I am now. That's where the artillery is that I keep hearing every day.
Wasn't it recaptured?
It was captured by the Russians. Ukrainians are trying to take it back. So he described one single episode of that war. He goes, well, imagine this. There's a small village. In front of the village, there's a field. And there's a forest, next to the field. There are Ukrainians attacking the Russians. Who are the Ukrainians? First of all, there's Ukrainian military. Secondly, there are special forces. Thirdly, there's military intelligence. Fourthly, there's the police special forces. Fifth, volunteer battalion. Sixth, just some random people, Ukrainian people in tracksuits with Kalashnikovs. He goes, there is no way that can be coordinated because it's not. They act in unison without even speaking to each other.
Very good.
Then a tank appears. They all go, is that our tank? There's no Z on it. It's our tank. Shoots at the Russian, leaves. Whose tank was it? No idea. How did it appear here? No idea. Has anyone called this tank? Nope. So that's what, the fighting is like. That's what the Russians are facing. And, he kind of ended his Facebook post saying welcome to hell, right? That's what the real kind of holocracy of Ukrainian war is. But if you think about it, why is it so effective against the Russians? That is because, these people are not coordinating through rules, methodologies, business practices, board meetings, decisions. Instead, they know their end goal. And they work in unison because they all know that final destination to which they want to get, right? They have their mission. They all have their separate assessments of the situation, but they know that, regardless of the fact whether this Ukrainian person standing next to you with a Kalashnikov is someone you know or not, or even is someone you trust or not, he's your asset and you're his. They know the enemy is there. They know who the enemy is. They know that enemies have weapons, and if the enemies get killed, you can take the weapons and therefore kind of improve your chances to survive longer, and so on and so forth. And this holocratic model actually is incredibly adaptive because it's fluid.
Кочубей Юрий, сколько время?
11:43.
11:43, прямой репортаж с места событий. Вот эти зетки, это город Харьков, 3 марта. Вот так выглядит русский мир. Вот он. Оп, приезжайте. Вот. Вот так вот.
Вот, смотрите, вот этот ящик.
Где?
Вот у них ящик.
Russians act differently. Russians need their kind of military commander to tell him, this is the Ukrainian military, you need to shoot at those guys, ignore the guys in tracksuits, or don't ignore the guys in tracksuits. There will be tank because we've intercepted communications, but we haven't because there weren't any communications, just some villagers who stole a tank, who know how to ride it back from Afghanistan in the Soviet days. They drove that tank to shoot at the Russians, they offloaded and left. And look, in 1945, that wouldn't have worked. But it's not 1945, it's 2022. Everything around us is completely different. Like, look, the amount, quality, and quantity and frequency of information we experience, the tools that we have in use. I mean, like, look, my 2.5-year-old girl speaks, fluent Russian, is learning English, counts to 20 and back, knows 2 different alphabets, Cyrillic and English, right? And does a lot of interesting things. She counts, she doesn't multiply, but she adds. And, she knows, for example, certain bone names that I don't even know, right? How does she know that? Well, that's because she's had the gadgets available to her, like for an hour, 2 hours a day. And there's no addiction to that gadget. That's an interesting observation. So she's not reliant or addicted to it. She's not reliant on it. So basically she would watch her cartoons, get the information, process it, and kind of go about her day, go play. But it sticks. Right. I wasn't like that when I was 2.5. When I was 2.5, I was still like, painting with my poop on the wall.
We didn't have the gadgets, we didn't have the information. My son, he'll be 3 at the end of May, and he can count up to 100. And he's doing basic addition. This is supposed to be highly advanced, but it's because he sees that information and he absorbs it. But
if you think about it, I mean, the people who kind of make the rules and who kind of execute and decide, especially in the business world, are the people who aren't used to today, who aren't adapted to today. Those are the people who grew up in the world of notebooks, or where the word mail actually meant like a physical, tangible letter with a stamp on it that you walk to the post office and post, right? So I think, look, what's happening at the moment is my subjective opinion, but I think we're in that middle stage between the old and the new, right? We're in that turbulent era where the old is kind of crumbling down, and everything is crumbling down. I mean, listen to Salim Ismail from Singularity and ExoWorks. I mean, the guy is right. I mean, if you look at social institutes, the things like education, marriage, religion, they all aren't up to date. I mean, how can you keep the social kind of structure of the world stable when you get a polygraph, a lie detector in your phone? That's 99% accurate. I mean, what's
Sure.
it going to do to marriage? I mean, what
Sure.
questions are you going to ask, and what answers are you going to get? One of my students actually said, like, but it's 99% accurate. It's not 100% accurate. I go, you tell your wife that.
Right.
So what's it going to do to marketing? What's it going to do to politics?
Warfare. What's it going to do to warfare?
To warfare, to politics. I mean, like, look, imagine if you have something similar to Google Lens, but that has like emotional detection, light detection. You point it at your TV when one of your politicians is speaking.
Right.
And the truth, the underlying truth. What's that like? Like, one of the questions I keep asking, for example, my audiences during my keynotes, and I still don't have an answer, actually do have an answer to that question. Like, those virtual assistants like Google Assistant, Siri, Alexa, whatever.
Right.
Let's try it with you. Which one do you have?
Well, I mean, I use different autofill, and I've used Siri before with Apple products.
Siri. Well,
yeah.
let's so you know what it is. You know how to work it. Just out of curiosity, can you tell me how you ask Siri to buy you some milk?
To buy me some milk?
Yeah.
I would say, Siri, can you buy me some milk from Whole Foods?
There you go. Buy me some milk from Whole Foods, right? Did you name the brand of the milk?
No.
Who decides the brand of the milk that you get?
Very good.
Why are we spending tens of billions of dollars a year on marketing and on brand health when we're literally on the verge of a major paradigm shift on how we do things? Like, it's literally like spending time and money and billions of dollars making the physical calculators better in a world where a calculator has become ones and zeros of binary code in your phone is available for free to you. And that's just one of the examples. I mean, like, behavioral patterns are changing. I mean, when I did that podcast for the New Yorker, I told them, like, look, what's really dangerous for Ukraine is that effect of adaptivity within attention economy. What that means is, instead of explaining it to you academically, I'll showcase it to you. I mean, can you name at least one of the astronauts of Apollo 11 that set foot on the moon?
Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong. There you go.
Yeah.
Do you know a single name from Apollo 12?
Right.
That flew a few months later.
Right. I think David Remnick said point taken.
He said point taken. Look, I still haven't. I've done this to space nerds, and I'm yet waiting on that first person to actually name one. I'll give you more than that. I mean, we all know, for example, Jim Lovell from Apollo 13, but we know him not because of his failed trip to the moon. We know him from his failed trip to the moon because it was a failed trip, and secondly, we know him because of that Ron Howard movie
and Tom Hanks.
So let me reiterate my point. Apollo 14. Do you know at least one? Do you know how many Apollos there were? I'm a space nerd, I know, but most people don't. Right. And that, and we're talking about like humans flying to the moon.
Right.
So what chance does Ukraine stand in a world like that? The only chance we have is to kind of keep people talking about us.
And Zelenskyy has been elevated in much of the same way to become an embodiment of the Ukrainian cause, in the same way that George Washington was the embodiment of the American cause in the American Revolution. And, I keep on running up against these similar frames when you think about how the Ukrainian defense is being mounted against this staid, autocratic, top-down, paralyzed Russian army. I wrote a book on the American Revolution called The First American Flag. It was a peer-reviewed history book. And it's just so similar, and the war of attrition, both politically, militarily, Ukraine will prevail. Ukraine will prevail.
Look, there'll be one difference with the US, though. I mean, I know our mentality, and I've studied our kind of, macro behavior in Ukraine for quite some time now. I can tell you that when this is all over, Zelenskyy won't be a George Washington, he'll be a Churchill. So most likely, he might not lose, the election if it's close enough to the victory, but, That's a definite possibility. I kind of one advice I keep giving his team. I won't mention whether I told him personally or not, because it's a very sensitive subject. What I said, don't sanctify him so you don't have to crucify him.
Well, I think
that's very important.
I think
that's
that
really
I think that resonates with the new sort of decentralized asymmetrical ethos that the entire human family needs to begin to embrace. That this kind of industrialized model, this top-down model, that if you're setting up these leaders to be these icons, that there's a rise and there's a fall, and perhaps that needs to be compressed. We don't need to be taking ourselves through so much ascension for so much descent than to fall.
Well, let me explain a small bit of behind the scenes for you of this Zelenskyy phenomena. It's really important that that people realize that. People think that we still live in a world of like heroes and Cinderellas, and they kind of worship Zelenskyy as a Cinderella or a hero, or Tony Stark, whatever, whatever analogy kind of psychologically pops in their head. But it's not like that. It's a road to disappointment. The real phenomenon behind Zelenskyy is the fact that he's a perfect embodiment of that new kind of trend, new demand for sincerity. It doesn't matter whether the person is completely white, good, white in the sense like not black or evil, or like it's not that he's spotless and squeaky clean. It's not like he's doing everything right. The most important bit here is the fact that he is himself. There's no hypocrisy, and that's incredibly important, because look, there's no better defensive weapon against any reputation scandal in the world now, the way it is now, than just kind of being yourself, kind of admitting to screwing up, just kind of walking out there saying, guys, I am so sorry, I screwed up. I make mistakes. We all do. I'm human.
He's authentic.
That authenticity is what it really is in demand. So it's really funny to see some politicians, for example, Macron did it, and I'm kind of seeing a couple more yet to be named top politicians in the world kind of trying to do a Zelenskyy. So, they try and dress like him, they try and act like him, and, use his gimmicks and everything. That's not going to work.
Right.
Because he is Zelenskyy, they aren't. Instead, what Macron should be doing, he should be himself. And, if he doesn't have, an experience of actually building a personal brand like that, he should consult somebody, who's familiar with this wave of new sincerity, because all it takes is just one interview. It's a bit like, getting psychological help. So you need to be interviewed, you need to open up, and then the person will help you kind of highlight that silhouette of who you really are. And that would be your new personal brand. So in the world of abundance of information, it's scarcity that's valuable. If you've noticed, there's this really interesting pattern. In the world of scarcity, so in the 20th century, our kind of end goal was always abundance. So we tried to produce more, to create more, to be more perfect, to be more squeaky clean, all against,
more choices at the grocery store.
More choices at the grocery store. So more. And then one of the cases that I love where we saw that kind of pivot towards scarcity was the music industry. So, we had singles, we had albums, we had those bootlegs, whatever. And, more channels, more MTVs, and then we go MP3s, something that you could copy and paste as simple as Control-C, Control-V.
Right.
And there's nowhere else to go. Some bands like Metallica tried to fight it, their infamous kind of lawsuit against Napster and so on and so forth. But then I think what Steve Jobs did, that's incredible. He was the first person within that industry who realized that instead of striving for abundance, what he needs to do is kind of monetize and kind of make valuable that artificial scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
So in the world of free MP3s, he started selling them. In the world of abundant music, we started selling playlists and suggestions and moderate information, and kind of it worked. Right. Like digital downloads. I mean, if you noticed, the MP3 piracy is no longer a huge problem. I mean, people, it's convenience and kind of monetizing the artificial scarcity. The way it works, I mean, imagine this. Imagine you're married to the most beautiful woman in the world. Like you're gonna be in love with her for what, year, 2, 3, 5, 10. But sooner or later you'll get bored. But if you go on holiday and kind of start missing her, or if she leaves for a year, right, and then comes back, you suddenly love her more again. Okay, so you kind of, the more you miss something, the more you kind of, in a world of abundance where everything is available to you, the more you create the artificial scarcity, the more you can monetize it and capitalize.
Value goes up.
Yeah, and that's the way personal branding works in this day and age. So instead of
do you think Zelenskyy is getting a little too much play in that scarcity abundance analysis that you're doing?
One of the reasons, like, look, I love the guy, and I love the majority of his team, but one of the reasons that I'm not there with them is because people who do his personal branding at the moment think differently. I disagree with what they're doing, and I think we're gonna see a wave of disappointment in due course, because, like, look, there can be too much of a good thing. I think what they need to be doing in terms of his personal branding, in terms of his communications, is to be showing more of him as he is. Introduce some scarcity into it, so kind of not communicate it as much and as often as they do. Kind of because, like, also, like, that Apollo 12 effect also can happen quicker if you introduce more information. So basically, the more interviews he does, the more covers he does, the faster people will get bored of him. So the brightest flame burns quickest. I mean, that's a rule of thumb in the information world. So I think I think they're gonna face a downhill slope in terms of this wave of love for him. But I still think,
let me just interject real quick, Igor, because I remember during the impeachment crisis with Donald Trump being impeached because of his perfect call to Ukraine, that your team exhibited a lot of restraint, because obviously you had such massive political pressures coming in. The disinfo that was going on, Russia's, stoking disinfo. But you showed there was a lot of restraint because you had to perform a balancing act in that moment. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking out loud, but to me, it felt like you were, but it was just perfectly played.
We were, one of the things we were using, I mean, since we're talking about, how scarcity and abundance coexist in the world, we were using scarcity against abundance here. So basically, we realized that, because of the frequency and the magnitude of what was being said in the media, the less we say, the better, the more valuable our voice becomes. And you have to realize that we were playing catch-up game here. So we wanted to keep that last word to ourselves. And because of that, we always exercised restraint. We never felt really wise.
It was really wise.
We never felt for that temptation to do a wag the dog here.
Right.
Because obviously we had every means of doing that, I mean, don't get me wrong. All it would have taken was one phone call.
Oh, for
to
sure.
to like, I don't know, the New York Times or something, and global history would have changed. But
That's right.
that's one of the things my wife told me. Is hilarious. It was like mid-impeachment. I come home and we have this terrace, and I think it was a Friday. So she cracks open a bottle of wine, pours me a glass, pours herself a glass. We sat down, we kind of discuss how my day has been and what's happening in the impeachment, kind of. And halfway through that glass of wine, and she goes like, "No, I go. Can you imagine that if I get really drunk right now and I lose control, that I can literally change the world's history in a major way?"
That's right.
And then she looks at me and laughs. She goes like, I'll give you more than that. If I get drunk tonight, you will definitely change the world's history. So it was really funny.
But I have to express, for the lovers of democracy and lovers of self-determination and checks and balances, the form of United States government, Trump was just
that's a Freudian slip.
Trump was just so antithetical to understanding the history of how the oldest constitutional democracy came into being and the checks and balances and the fundamental form of government that our nation is built on.
Let me stop you there. There's one rule that I set for myself, and I'm sticking by it. Do I have an opinion on every single politician you have in the US? On both sides, the Republicans and Democrats. Yes, I do. Am I gonna express it publicly? No.
Right.
No. Am I gonna participate in the conversation discussing your politicians? No. And the reason for that is respect. I mean, I would hate for a foreigner to voice an opinion on our domestic politics, and I think the same principle should work for yours. So I'm not going to discuss what I think of Donald Trump or Joe Biden or anyone. The only exception to that rule is Rudy Giuliani, and the reason for that, in my world, he's a combatant. So he started it. Now it's a fair fight. So
yeah, with that, I can totally respect that, Igor, and I know that this present circumstances and the need for continued support is very critical. So, there's been some breaking news that just happened today, March 23rd. Evidently, the highest level Putin advisor and oligarch, Anatoly Chubayev, has stepped down. Chubayev has stepped down and left the country, citing his opposition to President Putin's war in Ukraine, becoming, as reported by MSM, quote, the highest level official to break with the Kremlin over the invasion. Chubayev is one of the few 1990s era economic reformers who remained in Putin's government and had maintained close ties with Western officials. Known as the architect of Russia's 1990s privatizations, Chubayev gave Putin his first Kremlin job in the mid-1990s and initially welcomed his rise to power at the end of that decade. Are the rats leaving the sinking ship? Now, I say that, and I don't want to give off the impression that I'm trying to dehumanize by using this cliche, saying the rats are leaving the sinking ship. But with that, I will say that this aggressive war that Putin is waging against Ukraine is completely inhuman, and those that are supporting it are completely inhuman. So maybe a little dehumanization is pertinent at this point.
It's fine. It's a gray area. Plus, we didn't start this war, so feel free to dehumanize Russian politicians. I spoke with a friend of mine who knows his way around Russian politics today, and he told me a funny thing. He goes, well, Chubayev always runs away from a site of the explosion. So the fact that he's leaving Russia means it's going to blow up domestically for them, not internationally, and in terms of geopolitics. But another interesting thing to watch here, and I know it's going to sound funny, and it's going to sound like I'm kind of trolling them, but no, it'll be interesting to see whether Chubayev survives without a heart attack, the next month or two. because Novichok never sleeps, and
Right.
it's that's one of the most mind-blowing things about Putin. I mean, he's used like those chemical agents, on the British soil, for example.
Polonium.
And radioactive agents as well.
Yeah.
And I was talking about that nerve agent Novichok, but
Right.
but polonium as well. Yeah, that's radioactive. It's mind-blowing that there was no consequence whatsoever. And
Right.
from what we're seeing, the world was preparing for us to fall within 2-3 days, and they've already kind of come up with this new stability. How are they going to express deep concerns over what happened in Ukraine, and how they're going to rebuild those walls, and there will be the new Soviet bloc, and so on and so forth. So we look, our mission as people, the Ukrainians, is probably to be a thorn in the wake in everyone's side, and also to be a wake-up call to humanity, in the sense that, like, look, there's no way to postpone change. I mean, it either happens or it doesn't, and it's so long overdue that it's unbelievable. I mean, one last example, because we have 5 minutes. I'll have to run. There'll be time for one more question, but I'll give you one example. One of my clients before I joined Zelensky's team, one of my last clients was a big airline, and I did a keynote for them. It was a very like edutainment-y keynote, so it was more entertaining than academical, but I kind of gave them a bird's eye view of what I thought was happening in the world. And we had a Q&A session, then we had a coffee break and reception. So I'm standing there, I kind of get approached by the CEO of the company, a couple of his best mates, they kind of approach me and go like, "Oh, that was interesting, we know what we paid you for." Very entertaining. And they go like, "Is there anything you'd like to add to what you said from the stage?" I go like, "Yeah, guys, I mean, out of curiosity, what's your plan B if the planes stop flying? I mean, how's your business gonna run?" And they just laughed me off. They just said like, "Yeah, right." Like it's like saying, what are we going to do if there's an asteroid, approaching Earth? I think Netflix has answered that. Like, look, there are so many things that are imperfect with the world, so many missed opportunities that turn into threats. It's unbelievable. I mean, like, for example, like cinemas, right? We had cinemas shut down during the pandemic, and it's taken a toll on them and on Hollywood and everything. I've got one question. I mean, there are popular series on Netflix. Why don't they release them in cinemas weekly? If you had like Games of Thrones, every 2 weeks you'd have a new episode in cinemas, people would start kind of switching off their computers, going to cinemas, and they actually make more money that way.
That's right.
Why doesn't Netflix have their own chain of cinemas?
That's a great idea.
There are so many like those interesting observations. Some of them work, some of them don't. I mean, that's life. But the thing is, there are some major like macro things that are impossible to ignore, and are going to bite us in the backside if we don't do anything about them. And everyone, like, look, it's really interesting to see people's reaction, how they try and pigeonhole me. So, during the impeachment, because we did the balancing act, so whenever one of the sides was being more active in the media, we'd have our talking heads, our speakers, kind of take the other side. Mm-hmm. And kind of, so I even got I nearly got my visa revoked for sounding pro-Trumpian at one point.
That's a balancing act.
Yeah, it was really funny. Saved by the bell. But no, well, we were doing that. But I don't want to be pigeonholed. If you want me to compare myself to like whether I'm more Democrat or Republican in the US, I'm a mixture of both. So, for example, I believe in free markets. I believe in low taxes. I believe in the power of entrepreneurs. I believe in the Second Amendment, for example, and even more so now. Right. But at the same time, look, I believe in total liberty. I think it's only immoral and immature. It's just ridiculous in the 21st century for a state, for a government, or even for a community, or even for your family to be dictating to you or telling you what you can and cannot do with your body or with your personal liberties, as long as you don't kind of infringe on other people's liberties. So to kind of to give you an analogy here, a very dark analogy, like, I believe it's your decision whether you want to live or die. But if you choose to die, you need to do it in a safe manner. So don't jump off a roof and land on some poor grandma's head.
Right.
Figure out a way to do it.
I know we have limited time, Igor, and I definitely wanted to ask you one question, and it's in the context of me tapping into your expertise to provide some guidance for some folks that I've encountered in the U.S. There's a penetrating influence of Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
I know that you're uniquely aware of what happened in 2016 with the presidential elections and things like this, with the influence of Russian propaganda. So there are some on the political left, and I'd like to call them the alt left, that make claims about the Euromaidan protests in 2014, the Revolution of Dignity, that was a CIA-sponsored operation. And this is a core central Putin talking point, right? And yet I see, I used to be I ran for Congress in the United States Green Party. I delivered the State of the Union rebuttal for the United States Green Party in 2006. So I have a lot of friends that are on the left, and also, like yourself, I have conservative values and respect Republican and conservatives as well. But, I want you to comment on this specific propaganda piece, that the Revolution of Dignity was a CIA-sponsored operation. I mean, what about the tens of thousands that put their lives at risk to fight for freedom, for democracy? And talk about Ukrainian national identity and agency. I mean, is Ukraine a real nation?
Yes, Ukraine is a real nation. I think, a lot of peoples around the world are learning it the hard way now, especially the Russians. Look, I'll answer this question sincerely. So first, the ideological part. Like, look, I've lost a friend on Institutskaya Street, from a sniper bullet. And I kind of every year now, I even wrote a song. I write songs. Yeah, sorry, happens. So I kind of remember him every year, and I can vouch for him. I can't vouch for 100,000 people, 1 million people who were in the streets of Kiev, like on the 2nd of December, 1st of December, 2013. But I can vouch for him, and definitely no brainwashing, definitely no CIA money. It was a revolution of dignity, and the reason for that name is the fact that everyone was fed up with the old system, with corrupt pro-Russian cronies, and Russia weaponizes corruption. And if you haven't paid close attention to the people Russia appoints, to those puppets, to the stooges, they're all imbeciles. I mean, they are like, they look for the most corrupt, the most stupid person in the room, and he's their first choice candidate. Look up Oleg Tsarev, the guy who they're trying to push now in Ukraine, who's following the Russian army and trying to threaten everyone. He's a Ukrainian.
This is a general?
No, he used to be a people's deputy, a member of parliament in Ukraine, of a pro-Russian party. Then after the Revolution of Dignity, he fled to Russia. And now he's back. They want to appoint him their Gauleiter of Ukraine, or whatever they're going to call it, So he does those videos kind of telling, Russian Ukrainian local government to give up the city, and we're going to run it together from Mother Russia. So just look him up and look at his face. That'll be enough to kind of understand, that intelligence is, human intelligence is the enemy of any authoritarian state. They want you to be stupid. They want you to be zombies. And they only trust people who are, more stupid than they are and more corrupt than they are, because they're easy to control and manipulate. Now, in terms of CIA, no idea and no way. It's an unfalsifiable theory. So, there's no way to prove it right or wrong. And that's important. It's like simulation hypothesis, right? I mean, are we living in a simulation? There's no way to prove it just yet. And my personal remark on the subject matter. If there's anything people trying to manipulate Ukrainians with money have learned over the years, is that Ukrainians will always take that money and will never be manipulated. Putin's learning it the hard way now, because some people are saying that he spent more than $1 billion to try and build that propaganda narrative in Ukraine, to win the hearts and minds, to make Ukrainians pro-Russian. And if you notice, his own distant relative Medvedchuk, Putin is Medvedchuk's daughter's godfather. Medvedchuk, who was in charge of that, reported to Putin that Vlad, we are ready, invade. Obviously, the money was stolen. Obviously, they didn't win any hearts and minds.
Right.
So, look, even if somebody kind of spent money on trying to win the hearts and minds of Ukrainians will always take the money and do their own thing. So it's a non sequitur there. I would classify it under unfalsifiable conspiracy theory.
Very good. Very good. So just lastly, the death, trauma, and travail that the world has been witness to in Ukraine has been heartbreaking. Children, mothers, fathers, 10 million displaced people, so many tears. I recently saw a video that Zelenskyy produced, which ended with a vision of hope and a rebuilt and triumphant Ukraine. Igor, we really want to help make that vision a reality. And I want to thank you for your courage, your brilliance, and your leadership to show the world what's worth fighting for. All we have is our life force and our time. And, you and your fellow Ukrainians are demonstrating, what is right in the world. So I want to express my sincere appreciation.
Thank you. And if I may add to what you said, a quote. I don't remember who said it, but I love this quote, and I think it's the perfect way to describe what Ukrainians are doing now. Somebody said that if you want to win, find something you are willing to die for and live for it. So I think that's what we're seeing in Ukraine. And hopefully, I sincerely hope, first of all, that it ends quickly. Secondly, I hope that we can stop this just barbaric and unnecessary loss of human life. It's 2020. It's 2022. It's not 1000 AD. Right. BC. Sorry. Right. Thirdly, I really hope that what's so special about Ukraine is because of our historical ties and our mindset, we are very different from both the East and the West, right? So we're not Russian, we're not those vertical integrated, barbarian kind of aggressive bunch of people, but we're not exactly Western either. Mm-hmm. So we're not prone to that extra bureaucracy and kind of those long deals and procrastination and that sense of security that we can that we can disregard everything that's happening. I'm taking it to the extreme.
Of course,
we're different. We are that's why I describe our political system as representative anarchy. So instead of representative democracy. So I think once this is all over, the world finds time to actually learn from Ukraine, learn those lessons, because we do have a lot to share with the world. And, we've been through a lot. We're a young country, we're only 30 years old, turning 31 this year. And yet we've been through so much that we have stories to tell, we have lessons to share, and I think we've deserved the right to be an independent, sovereign, and popular nation. So hopefully that's how it ends.
Absolutely. Well, Igor, thank you so much for your generosity today and your time. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you and seeing you lead to help spread the lessons that need to be learned from this harrowing situation.
Thank you, Byron. And by the way, I'll throw an idea your way. So if you or your viewers or anyone else, if you have any questions, we can do a part 2 with
Sure.
me actually answering the actual questions that we
Super.
receive.
Super,
As a result of this boring
and I'll
blabber from me.
No, it's been a huge data dump, which is what we got to do. This is like, Keynote with a war.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you so
Take care.
much. Bye bye.
Thanks.